Welcome back to the Following Your Gut podcast, the podcast where health science meets clinical wisdom and hopefully many, many other wonderful things as time goes on. I want to welcome you all back, and I'm really hoping that you enjoyed the last episode of the start of the Master Supplements US Enzymes story, the founders talking about the early days and hopefully everyone getting a chance to understand who they are and what drove them to get to this present point in time. And in that episode, I did say to Mr. Jeff Thurston that we would want to have him back because he mentioned the story of probiotics that really drove the company forwards and how they have done things differently well before the time where that became a popular way of marketing these things. So Jeff, I want to welcome you back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fabulous.
I love
It's a little
it.
chilly up here in the north, but we're doing well.
Well, that's why heating is a wonderful thing, as are warm beverages. And we'll make sure that as this time goes on, it won't be too long till the temperature starts to drop.
All right.
Little short episodes are wonderful. So, last time you were here, you and other Jeff told the story of the company, and you said something really interesting in that episode that really made me want to have you back and talk about what strain designations are and why they're important in probiotics. But you said something in the time frame of around 2003 that no one really knew what a probiotic was. Is that true?
Well, in terms of my circle of friends, I would say that we just started a new company, and they say, "What are you doing?" Probiotics. They go, "What's that?" People just didn't know what a probiotic was, and then well, as I like to say, my favorite person, Jamie Lee Curtis, came on television talking about yogurt with probiotics, which are good for your belly, and all of a sudden everybody decided, that's a good thing to get into, and still are.
Yeah, it's funny because if I think back into my childhood days, I remember my mom would always keep acidophilus in the fridge. And I didn't know what it
Mhm.
was, but every time I would have a sore
Right,
or upset stomach, she's like, "Oh, take an acidophilus." And then me being me, rather than going with one, I'm like, "I'll take five and see what happens." And I'm wondering if some of my challenge was because I was overdosing myself. But back then it was just a name. It was just something on the capsule. And fast
right.
forward to maybe 5 years ago, the marketing of probiotics really changed. The industry started talking about survivability. It started talking about the transit through the digestive system and the viability of organisms. But we're still in 2019, 2020 when that started to become a talking point. You guys seemingly had a time machine because you thought about these things in the early 2000s. Like, where did this idea come from, and why are strain designations and the delivery so important?
Well, Randy, I think we said in the first episode, Randy was the first one to really commercially manufacture acidophilus, back in the 1970s with Chris Hansen's, which was in Milwaukee. Um, and he knew all the problems of how do you grow them. Randy was always doing bench tests. There was a new bench test going on, even though they just improved the production facility. There was always another bench test to see what they could do to make it better. And he knew about what it took to grow the probiotic bacteria. He knew what it took to um, freeze dry them, and then he knew what it took to reconstitute them. And all of those things were part of just the growing the bacteria. And then the other part is that Randy knew that the stomach was a barrier to entry. Otherwise, all the bacteria we're mixing with our saliva and swallowing all the time, we're going to have a nice warm place to grow, if we didn't have good stomach acid. So he knew that those were the problems, and he set out looking how to solve those problems. And
Got it.
that's where we had our basis.
So if I'm a consumer listening to this, or if I'm a practitioner, I might not be under the impression that if I take something, what I think should happen is not what might happen. Is that what you're saying when it comes to taking a probiotic and the conditions of what's going on inside the body?
Well, not always. There's a lot of thought out there that even dead bacteria have some benefit,
Okay.
right? Because the the metabolites, the cytokines, chemokines are there, and they can have some value, but their value is like a one-time use. If you take a probiotic and it has the ability to hang around for a while, it continues to make those cytokines and chemokines and
Mm.
metabolites. So that it's a little bit different in terms of that. And then you also have the issue of spores. They don't get harmed by the stomach acid, but they have to have specific conditions when they get to the other side to come out of the spore form into the vegetative state, and then they can do what they're supposed to do. So, you have all of these environmental variables that are going on when you take a capsule of probiotics
Okay.
or
So
eat
what it,
yogurt.
or yogurt, yeah, different. I mean, I'm sure it's not exactly the same, but it's the same kind of idea with fermented foods. So in saying all that, what it sounds like you're saying is you're trying to figure out what the optimal outcome is given all the variables because you don't know what's going on inside someone's system. And then obviously when it comes to the productions of what you said, cytokines and chemokines, those are chemical messengers that bacteria will create to speak with the immune system. So as a manufacturer focusing on probiotics, what is your goal with giving someone a probiotic? Is it about where the probiotic gets? Is it about what the probiotic does? Is it all of the considerations? Because I don't think anyone looks at things quite like you guys do. I think it'd be really wonderful to hear that approach.
Well, yeah, there are so many other little things and parts and parcels to this. So there are um, maybe 100 different strains of acidophilus.
Mhm.
Some of them we like to call sticky microbes. They have a glycocalyx, which gives them the ability to adhere to epithelial cells. And others are smooth like a hot dog and go through you just as fast.
Mhm.
So, you first of all, you want to pick strains that they're going to have the ability to adhere. Then you want to look at which ones are compatible. Do they fight each other? For instance, most people don't know that Lactobacillus plantarum inhibits the growth of bifidobacteria. So our concept again is why put them together?
Mhm.
So this all comes down to knowing the genus, the species, but also knowing the strain, what it can do, what function it has. Does it get along with the other ones that you're taking? If you don't take them together, they're going to find their niches. They're going to do their thing. It's not like you can't take it, but if you put them together and they're fighting all the way through, two bulldogs in a sack fighting, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
It's a nice
So
visual too.
we look at we look at all of those different things when we come up with a probiotic. So we knew that very early on we needed to give everybody as much information as we could about the strain, because it is the strain that matters, what it does, where it works, how it works, and everything else. Two different strains of acidophilus. One might inhibit E. coli, another might inhibit Salmonella. They might both be very good at staph, but neither one's very good at Listeria. There's all these different things that they do, but if you don't know the strain, you don't know what it's going to do. So we started publishing third-party lab tests online by strength, purity, and activity. We always listed the strains and what we and we always added the American type culture collection number or the collection number so that you could look it up and see what it does.
That sounds like a lot of incredibly deep detail, and it sounds like it would be somewhat of a standard to uphold to, but is this a uniform thing within the supplement industry? Is this a mandate across all probiotics?
No, perhaps my biggest gripe in the probiotic industry is the strain designations are trademarks. They have
Could you explain
nothing to
a
do
little?
with scientific notation.
Ah, okay. So they're
They're
branded.
trademarks. They are owned by, let's just say a strain designation is owned by one of the major manufacturers, and they license it to one probiotic company, right? And so they're the only ones that can use that name on their bottle, but that
Mm,
doesn't mean we don't buy it, right?
got
The
it.
one thing they can't do is they can't change the American Type Culture Collection number from what it is. So if you have that, you can go look up the genetics of the organism. And if you're really good, you can say everything that that organism can do based upon the culture collection number. And there's 75 collections around the world. There's the Outer Mongolian Agricultural University. has a collection. I mean, they're just everywhere. So you can find the organisms, but they're stored in liquid nitrogen for future use.
I would imagine that only someone who really knows would reference Outer Mongolian culture collection. So I believe that what you're saying is true and authentic. Okay, so then let me see if I can round this out. How you guys are looking at the concept of a probiotic is really down to how the different designated strains, because you want to know who's in the capsule, how those guys operate independently, how those guys play together among a community that's being supplemented. And based upon that, and this statement is not a complete thought, but it's the best that we currently have. That is the most idealized way of approaching generating a probiotic formula. So if I'm taking that kind of probiotic, then I likely, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I likely have a better understanding of what that probiotic might do inside my digestive system, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay, but what
exactly.
if,
That's
perfect. So
that's
then what,
exactly what we're trying to do. Probiotics are the police. They're
Mhm.
not going down. I mean, all the ones we have are of human origin, right?
Mm,
So they came from a human. So why wouldn't you think they would work well in a human? And if you have them there and they just can control some organisms that may be giving you a problem, then they're just the police. And when you get back to your, I like to call it probiotic fingerprint,
mhm.
you don't need it so much anymore.
So then what you're saying there is there are cases to where using a probiotic based upon its functionalities can be very targeted and focused just to help get someone back to a baseline. So that's an interesting conversation maybe we can have afterwards where it's like maybe a probiotic every day for the rest of your life isn't something that you would always want to do depending upon the person. But what I'm more interested in asking you is, so if you guys are doing this, but it's not the standard, what kind of functionality claims could theoretically be made about probiotics that don't adhere to these operating systems?
Well, just remember, we're under the constraints of the FDA, and we're not allowed to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Mm,
All right. So claims is always a very difficult term to use. So that's why if we give you the strain, it's easy for you to go use Google Scholar and look it up, and it'll tell you what it can do. We really can't say, what it does, except for saying this organism, these are the structure and function claims. For
got it.
instance, if this organism makes IL-10 or this one makes TNF alpha, I can say that. I cannot continue on with, is that an inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory cytokine?
Mm,
That's the claim part. So we're all kind of limited in what we can say about our products. So again, giving you the strain gives you the ability to look and see what it is, but that's just the first part of it because there are a lot of companies using the exact same strains.
mm,
But then you have to look at how do you get that strain to where it needs to go,
okay.
and then how do you wake it up so that it has the ability to compete. I.e., most probiotics, let's just say it takes an hour to replicate, and you take a pathogenic E. coli might replicate in 20 minutes. So in 6 hours, you're going to have 250,000 E. coli. You only have 32 or 64 lactobacillus or bifidobacteria. So you need to take a lot, but you got to get them there so that they can have an effect.
And from what I'm understanding too, is certain strains reside in certain areas, and typically the further down the tube they reside, the harder it is to theorize that those cultures are going to get delivered. So now that we've covered off the strain designation side, and I want to sum it up just to make sure that I have it correct here. If you understand what's in the capsule, you can understand what those organisms do. So, although you can't make claims, you have an understanding of when a specific strain would be beneficial or potentially antagonistically detrimental
Mhm.
to a person or a situation, given who that person's dealing with. And if you don't go down to the strain designated level with the presentation of the product, I guess you really don't know all that that probiotic potentially can provide you as an effect. Is that fair to say?
That's fair. Just let me point out one example. I probably have used this before, but some people, when they take a probiotic, they they don't respond well to it. right? And so they just say probiotics don't work for me. No, that one didn't.
Hmm.
Other ones might. So, for instance, there's a real small subset of people who can't metabolize D negative lactic acid. Right? The mirror image, the L positive, they can handle, but not the D negative form. So, why would you give them a probiotic that makes D negative lactic acid?
It sounds illogical to me.
Exactly. And so that's the kind of thing that you can look at and say, if you don't know what it does, then you're just taking a pig in a poke, putting it into a human being and seeing if it's going to have an impact. But if you know that this person has an issue with those things, then you try to find a probiotic that's going to work. If you have a probiotic that's only going to work in the colon, right? Well, that's a good thing to know, because if you take that and let's say somebody has an issue and you resolve that issue, well, you know the problem was in the colon. But if you
Mm,
take a probiotic that works in both and you resolve the problem, you don't know which one it was. Was there a facultative organism, or was it obligate anaerobe that made the difference? There's a
mm.
lot of things you can glean from which probiotic you take. So what we did was we just basically came up with four different structures, and gave them general targets. But that doesn't mean that that's going to be the target for you. It might be the target for me.
And that's also kind of into the theoretical abstracts of saying, look, there's just things we can't know based upon what the body's doing. You can't go in with a little camera, follow that probiotic organism in there, and get evidential proof of what it's doing in real time. You can see what a lab test might say as a change, or you can talk to the person and see how they're operating. But what I do like about what you said, and I'm seeing this trend in the health industry nowadays, people are honoring what's called biochemical individuality. And with
Mhm.
your strain designation idea and how that's materialized into different end products, you're giving the person the opportunity to figure out what resonates with them and helps them specifically. Where, I mean, I've had that experience happen to me where I took a very powerful probiotic. It had a ridiculous hundreds of billions of, 10, 12 different organisms in there. I couldn't leave the bathroom one day, but I said to my friend, dude, if you want to try this, go ahead. Just be mindful. It wrecked me. He was like, these are amazing. So it really is about the individual. And that's why sometimes people try a product, they get lucky and it works perfectly. But with this more informed and I guess scientific approach, you can start to eliminate potentialities of where things would be more beneficial or would be less beneficial. And you can guide either the person who's seeking them out or at least educate the practitioner as to how to align symptom analysis, the identification of what the person's presenting, maybe some lab tests, and say, oh, well, based upon the functionalities, I would start here as opposed to there. Or, oh, if you want to get rid of this, this is where you go versus that. So I think it's a brilliant, brilliant approach. And I'd never seen it in probiotics until, I got connected with you guys. It's part of what I loved. It was this philosophical thought with this, again, this intuitive knowing of, yeah, there's different ways that this can be done and they can all be beneficial. But you also alluded to something that I want to segue into now, delivery. And I still remember when, certain probiotics came out and their big knock against lactobacillus and bifido and various other strains is, well, look, they can't survive an acidic environment, to which I said, that makes a lot of sense. And it's not untrue. It's a very true statement for the most part. But you guys figured something out. What was that?
Well, it just goes back to just basic chemistry. And sodium alginate at lower pH, donates some electrons, becomes alginic acid, and it becomes like a shell. So we figured out, well, what if we took this and we put it in the capsule? Then when the capsule dissolves, the sodium alginate that's inside the capsule converts to alginic acid and it creates a shell around the bacteria. And if we put a little buffer in there and keep the pH above 4, we'll get them through the stomach. We'll lose the ones on the periphery, but we'll still get the majority through the stomach. Actually, we'll probably get through what we guarantee through the stomach, because we're always putting in overage. And so it's probably the overage is probably going to get knocked off, on the periphery. Then after the pancreas and bile and everything else comes in, bicarbonate goes into the system the pH goes back up, the alginic acid reverts back to sodium alginate. So you've delivered them through the stomach, but there's another curious thing about that sodium alginate. It's like a gel, a real sticky gel. If you put it on a spoon and added some water, it'd be worse, harder to get off than peanut butter. So it stays together. So now the probiotic bacteria are in their own little
It's like a life raft.
gel-like submarine,
Yeah, it's like a submarine.
and they're not competing with food and space with the indigenous organisms. Remember, they're freeze-dried. They have to be reconstituted to function.
Mm.
All right. So for us, the idea of incompatible organisms in the same little submarine didn't make a lot of sense for us. Now, it doesn't make so much difference maybe with other people, but with us, that whole concept had to be, the best, if you want to call it energy, the best synergy, the best everything you could have
Mm.
inside that little submarine was important. And we knew that you could not grow probiotic bacteria without using polysorbate 80, but we also knew nobody wanted polysorbate 80. So we came up with a product we call Lactostim, which reconstitute the cell membranes of these freeze-dried bacteria so they can intake nutrients and output metabolites more quickly. And within our own lab, we've done a lot of studies with a lot of other probiotics. And if we do add our Lactostim to their products, they produce more lactic acid in 12 hours. Now, in 24, 36 hours, they might be the same. But somebody with diarrhea, after 12 hours, it's gone. So, there were a lot of things that we looked at. So how do we get it there? How do we make it function properly and let them get to their spaces without being, consumed by all the other bacteria that are down there?
That's brilliant. And again, it may be an assumption, but I think it's fair to assume that a lot of people think the nature of just taking the probiotic shifts things in a way that's hopefully positive. But it's really about those deeper details. It's not just about the what, it's the why and the how. And I really like the story that you put forth there because it's so thoughtful in its construction. It's number one, we got to make sure that we know what these things are doing. Number two, we got to make sure that we know who plays well and who doesn't. So we're going to create an ideal community and an environment. Number three, and this is the one that really blew my mind, we assume that just taking something gets into our system optimally, right? Whether it's eating food, taking a supplement of vitamins or minerals, but taking a probiotic, we just assume that it's going to know where to go. And like there's a lot of feet of intestinal tube. That's a very interesting question about where does it actually settle. But what it sounds like you're saying is you're aiming for that one area that you know that bacteria have increased population. So that little submarine starts to dissolve and you can allow for that delivery system. But you're also packing them with a little lunch, you're packing them with some food that they can
Mm-hmm.
start doing their thing because the goal is to, I guess, create harmony in the digestive system. The microbiome is not just the
Mm-hmm.
bacteria, that's the microbiota. So the microbiome has the microbes, the epithelial cells, the cells of the digestive lining. And last time I checked, there's a lot of immune representation within the microbiome. And it's that triangle, if you will, of optimal communication and optimal function. And that seems to be the most powerful way that a probiotic can be created in order to be efficacious and conditionally useful. What I mean by conditionally is under conditions of diarrhea are very different than under conditions of someone just wanting to have a healthy digestive system. So it sounds like you have all of those bases covered, and that's really up to the person or the practitioner to seek out what it is that they feel like they need the most.
Well, yeah, I'm always going to go back to this. If you don't stop the insult, you're not going to get over the problem, right? And if you're eating junk, I don't care what probiotic you take, it's not going to make much of a difference. If you like chocolate and I like vanilla, we put strawberry into the system, neither one of us is going to do very well.
Hmm.
But if we put chocolate into the system, you're going to do better than I am.
Mm.
And since, like, particularly in the colon, fiber makes it all the way through the small intestine. It gets into the colon, that becomes food for the probiotic bacteria and or the bacteria in the colon.
Mm.
And they may need as many as 6,000 enzymes to break it down, but we don't make those enzymes. So that has to come from the bacteria that are in your colon to break down the fiber that you're eating.
Mm.
So it's what you eat, and there's a lot of workout. The difference between apple pectin and orange pectin makes a difference in what microbes are going to do better. It's just everything. So if you can stop the insults, start eating a good, healthy diet, and you take a few probiotics, like I said, to be like the police, to get things back in order, your body has the ability to heal itself. But if you have to stop the insult, you can take the probiotic to help you get through. Some people can take it and continue eating junk, and it helps them for a period of time. But eventually, what you do today, 20 years from now, is going to pay the piper. So, it comes down to, you know, eating good food, and that will help your probiotics, and they will also help you. So it's a synergy.
I love that. Yeah, the inevitability is all things in time not taken care of seemingly tend to fall apart, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, Jeff, well, thank you for all that. I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up here. What's one thing about probiotics that you wish the average consumer or the average medical professional would know that seemingly is a little bit of a misguided understanding nowadays?
Well, I can put it into because you're buying it, the consumer's purchasing it, right?
Mm,
So the things you would want to look for: a glass bottle instead of a plastic bottle, a strain designations guaranteeing each one so you know what it's doing instead of a blend that may have the most of the least expensive and the least of the most expensive to hit a price point.
mm.
There's a lot of things you can look at just looking at the bottle and what it does, and then obviously it's research. I like to say the most expensive probiotic in the world is the one that doesn't work. They don't care what you pay for it. If it doesn't work, you just wasted your money. So you might as well try to find out which one is going to be best for you. And so check with your doctor and but we also have a YouTube channel at US Enzymes, and there are many different things that you can find there on our website. There's a lot of information that I can't just give you in a short half an hour, but it's already there.
Yeah, and if anyone is interested, I highly encourage them to go there. You'll have to listen to me talk a lot, and Jeff will also be on there. He's very interesting when he talks. I promise you of that. But the nature of things is you guys have been doing things differently for a long time. And now that, it's not a flash in the pan with a great marketing budget, it's long-term successes, customer feedback, practitioner loyalty, all of these things are really starting to show what this kind of consideration and I guess quality execution of a series of products can really do. It's the takeaway that I have from today. I want to thank you for is a probiotic really isn't simply just a probiotic. There's so many sub considerations. And if you want to put on your propeller hat and really become self accountable, is the word that I would say for your own health, knowing these things is always going to benefit you or the people that are closest to you, whether you are an individual who's wanting to learn more about their health, or whether you're a practitioner with a busy practice rather, full of clients. Knowing these specific nuances will help you have greater success. So, Jeff, I want to thank you for being here today. I think we're going to have you back at some point because you mentioned prebiotics and different kinds of pectins and fibers, and I know that's a very long, nuanced, and sometimes confusing topic for other people. So we'll hopefully have you back in the near future. But thank you for your time. Any parting words before we sign off?
No, just I think you said it best when you look. We're not a big company, but our customers are loyal. We have doctors who started using our product in 2003, and they're still using them.
Mm.
And they're not going away to find something that's better. They're using it, they're seeing the results in their patients, and we have consumers who are doing the same thing. So, it's if you make a good product, it will stick around. You know, if it's not just marketing.
Love that. All right. Thank you again, Jeff. Thank you for everyone who
Thank
listened
you, Roland.
today. And we'll be back with another episode very soon.